Hi, my name is Matthew Hicks. I'm the Director and Chief Curator of White Columns, the oldest alternative art space in New York, and juror, the curator of this year's Mohawk Hudson exhibition at the SUNY Albany University Art Gallery. And I'm also an artist and a writer. I think an exhibition like the Mohawk Hudson is a kind of vital resource for this region, and also I think, as it occurs periodically, it allows you to in a way take the temperature of the kind of art being made in this part of the world at any given time. I think what was unique about this experience was that there really was a region that I was not familiar with. So it was the opportunity to encounter artists and communities and ways of working that were perhaps unfamiliar to me. So we were looking at over, I think, 1,200 individual artworks. We ended up with about 35 artists. It could certainly have been a lot more because of the quality and strength of the work that was submitted. And I think it was clear from the kind of work that was submitted that it's artists of all kinds. And I think for me that was one of the really fascinating and great things about this process, was that on the one hand I wasn't familiar with these people, but on the other hand their work spoke of this kind of diversity and broadness that I was really hoping to find, and I found it many times over. We could make a very compelling exhibition that represented multiple, perhaps even conflicting and divergent voices. And for me that was the critical thing, that this wasn't trying to find a homogeneous set of concerns that might typify this region. Rather, what I was interested in was reflecting the diversity. So I think in a great way the exhibition is really an argument. It's an opportunity, I think, for very different kinds of voices, both in terms of the artists but also in terms of the viewers, to start to have new thoughts, additional ideas about visual culture in this part of the world at this moment in time. I think what you'll see in the exhibition are some very striking individual presentations of singular works, very singular, almost statement-like. And other artists, I think, you get a sense of the nuance of their work through a number of pieces. I think for the viewer, as you move through the exhibition, you have a set of very different formal physical relationships with the actual objects themselves. So you have a very kind of visceral, tangible, tactile relationship with different kinds of objects and different kinds of making. This ranges from people working with ceramics, which is interesting because ceramics have become very popular again in the larger art world. There was certainly a number of artists working with what I would call craft, a number of artists working with material, working with stitching, and various forms of kind of fabric related art making. But then other artists were working with digitally animated video, photography, drawing, quite formal painting. Other artists are working with sculptural installation. So I think it's the diversity of work I was interested in is also amplified and reflected in the diversity of the materials. I wanted to make sure that each of the selected artists' work had its own space and room to function on its own terms. We want the exhibition to work as a totality. Installing the work of 35 very different artists in a space simultaneously is quite a challenge, I think, especially when confronted with the quite challenging space here in Albany. I certainly think that the museum at the University of Albany, the actual gallery itself, is quite extraordinary, spectacular space. And I can see that for some artists it's probably a complicated environment. But I think at the same time there's a kind of sense of theatre to the space, literally, with a sweeping staircase and almost like the balconies. I mean, it is very theatrical-like. It's actually a great space for putting things into. But I think it's also a great space to move around. I think you become something very physical about the way you navigate the space itself. And certainly when you're in the upstairs looking down, you get presented with views, tableau, that you might not experience in a kind of classical, more conventional white box space. So there's something about the space that's quite idiosyncratic, and individual works certainly relate very specifically to certain aspects of the physical site. So for example, when you come up the top of the stairs, you're encountered by two photographic works of people looking at silhouette wall drawings. So all of a sudden, you as a viewer confront the backs of two viewers looking at another artwork, and certainly in the lobby, where there's a kind of carpet of like leaves, it's sort of thinking about a relationship between the outside world, nature, but also then this sort of interior space of the gallery, and it seems to exist in a kind of sort of hybrid in-between space. These were very idiosyncratic works that spoke clearly on their own terms. It played to some of the region's existing strengths, but perhaps also the exhibition is an opportunity to introduce some new voices. And the individual strengths of individual works seem to work as a kind of chorus. So you get a kind of polyphony of voices. And For me, that's what I think is just the most interesting, exciting thing, just stepping into the museum this afternoon, was just to see these very different voices together. Whatever you bring to this exhibition as a viewer, I have a funny feeling that you're going to find something that resonates with whatever your individual interest might be.